Leviticus. We read it for the second time, doing our nightly reading through the Bible, whole Bible again. We just wanted to share some of the things that we noticed the second time through. I think I might have talked about this before, I wish I had a notebook almost from my first time through, what I noticed from the first time versus the second time reading it, but I did not do that. Yeah. But I did notice, like I think I've mentioned this before too, I don't know about for you, Michelle, but I am more alert and want to understand this more, so I think I approached it with a different set of heart and eyes this time through, and I must admit there's still a lot of stuff in here that I don't really fully understand, and I know there's still tons of commentaries on Leviticus that Michelle and I did not dive into any of them, but things that stood out to me, one of the biggest ones is obviously the holiness of God. Do things to be different and to be set apart. The other thing was the blood, life, death, atonement type of words really stuck out to me, and what was getting across with those words, and just seeing how God was creating ways to be different for the Israelites to be different, I think, and I'm assuming it was culturally what was happening with the other nations around them, and no, this is how I want you to do things that's different from what you might see those around you doing, because I am Yahweh. And I saw that repetition a lot. I am Yahweh, I am Yahweh.
Yeah, especially at the last
his
few
authority
chapters
of who he is.
That's actually something that really stuck out to me. I forget exactly what chapter I really noticed it starting. I was going to quickly scan my Bible here to see. That's the way I already mentioned, a lot of water, but also some chapters had a lot of washing and rinsing, the cleanness. Remember, too, we also want to remind you guys that we learned along our journey is unclean. It's not the same thing as being sinful. They can overlap, but these were just rituals they did to be pure,
to be in God's presence again. Like I sat with too some of that too. Like I know it might seem, some of these things I feel like might be harsh. I just kept sitting with, okay, they just got from Exodus, wandering in the desert, and he wants to dwell with them. Like this is almost the first time, I think, since the Garden of Eden where God is going to dwell with his people.
And that's how Exodus left, right? They built the tent, but no one can enter, not even Moses. So this is showing how people can enter God's presence.
Yeah, because you can see how it starts. You know, Yahweh's calling to Moses, because at the end of Exodus, Moses wasn't even allowed, we noticed, to enter the tent. So this is a way to start.
Noticed here also, related to what Lori said earlier about a lot of this was to contrast the cultures around them. I definitely think that was the case. Because even starting at chapter 17, there was a lot about the forbidden sacrifices. And then 18 was about the pagan practice. Do not do this. Do not do this. My people will not do this type of thing. Because obviously it's things that the Lord did not approve of, and things I noticed as well. But in those sections is when he started saying, I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. I have it highlighted here. I'll show my Bible here. That is just repeated. I talked about this inside our locals community, but whenever I saw that, not only was it reminding his people that he is their God, but I think because of the influence of other cultures around him who were following other Elohims, he's reminding them, no, I am your Lord, follow my ways, we do things differently.
Yeah.
And we also learned that God giving these sacrifices was also a gift for them to be in his presence, and they could walk away confident in knowing they were forgiven. Other cultures, their gods, they did sacrifices hoping their God would appease to them.
Yeah, God's like, no, you just do this, you do this, you do this.
And we also noticed, I think we both noticed it as we were reading through it, that God would offer ways for people who didn't have financial means to have a lamb.
I wrote that. Like, God didn't have any favoritism. He didn't care what you were. He had a way for you to be able to dwell with him too.
Yeah.
That got to me, Michelle, I don't know if you noticed it too, was that repeating of the soothing aroma to Yahweh. And I actually meant to do a study on that myself.
Some people say that's a sense of aroma, also is a sense of like your prayers and petitions going up to God.
But I forget what chapter it was, so I forgot to kind of go through and highlight what I wanted to pick up. But one of the chapters, it mentioned this will not be a soothing something.
You mentioned
I thought that was interesting, because I know when you see things like that in the Bible, the authors want to make you stop and slow down and ponder on that. So that's something I know I kind of mentioned that I'm pondering on myself with that.
And also along with like stuff like that, there's just all that stuck out to me was I'm still sitting with, and I did a little bit of side research on it, but it's again something that over time I know I'll come to truly understand the importance and the beauty of it. Is a lot of the grain offerings when the priest got to eat the bread, a lot of that times when it would say this is especially holy, this is especially holy, it was mostly always around that, the grain offering. And I'm just still myself. I know that it also could relate, some people said it related because God provided them the bread,
Well, I think it's supposed to be separate. Like, this is not just in the ordinary bread.
That's right.
This is supposed to be looked at as super holy and sacred.
Like, don't be like, whatever, when you come in, like, no, this is something, a big deal. Okay, now I do think I remember that. So it did help me out. But a chapter that really stuck out to me, and I will admit that I still don't understand, is the one about the leprosy. And I spent quite a few days just reading little side articles here and there about it. I guess there is some debate on what really that term of leprosy, it's not how we all know it today. Yeah. And some people just saying it's general skin issues, but then some people relate a lot to it's sin, because these are priests looking at the skin. It's not a doctor looking at the skin. So people say it's more of a spiritual thing happening, why the person's getting it. And I don't know.
But just from reading the text, I didn't get anything sin related from that chapter. I just saw it as these people have this very unique skin disease.
And we also learned, I know it was a Bible Project video, and I think a few other ones I researched. A lot of the reason why this skin issue was particularly pulled out, and the bleeding of the women and all this stuff, is anything that relates to, and also we even saw it, I forget which chapter, I think it was 17 or something, God even shows that life is in the blood. So people are saying all of these particular rituals they had to do to be pure was anything that resembled or related to something that's life and death. So I guess this particular skin issue, people said related or looked like, or I forgot the words they used, but death. So that was also why this particular skin issue was the one that had a more serious protocol.
I also learned from, if you want to open up your Bibles, go to chapter 13, which is the start of the leprosy chapter, and it's verse 2. My translation did not have this word used. I forget, I looked it up what translation did end up having this word, but
verse 2?
Yeah, but the Hebrew, I believe it was the word below. I think mine it becomes an infection. I think,
Mine just says when a person has a swelling, scab, or spot on the skin of his body, and it may be a serious disease on the skin, he is to be brought to the priest.
Before the brought, so the serious skin. But I guess some translations turn that as below, and the Hebrew or something is, I think that word, it also means plague. So it's like a leprous below. My translation, I think, just calls it infection. So this is interesting. If the Hebrew word, I believe it was, and I was listening to someone say this, was like if it's tied to, or to remind them of the plagues that happened in Exodus. I just wrote God causing them to have this. Some people I know said that, and I at least you didn't see that from the text. It just said when you see
but maybe it's in the Hebrew words and we don't know Hebrew. I don't.
Yeah. So, but it's because it's not all sicknesses are from God though. So that one I was still kind of tricky on.
I didn't really chapter that was.
I didn't really quite see that from the text that God gave these people this. I don't know where that's coming from people. So if anybody knows, please let us know so I can have a better understanding of where they're getting that knowledge or information from.
Then we learn about the big Day of Atonement. I believe it's the Bible Project mentioned. It is like the middle chapter. What this is all about is the atoning of their sins.
And the Bible Project, we did watch those overviews.
Broke it up in 3
They did a beautiful, of course, always of finding the patterns, which Michelle and I tried to follow the patterns. But one pattern thing that I noticed of a pattern being repeated is back in chapter 13 with the leprosy. Starting at verse, I think 42 or 40. 40. Talks so much about the head. So it almost seems like the head was a big deal, that they seem to have more of a worse kind of thing than someone just having it on their skin. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting to sit with. So I wrote, just seems to have more of a worse, intense, unclean ritual here for anything dealing with the head. And it says the head, I wrote, the priest decides if unclean and leave. And then chapter 14, then later they'll see the priests actually go to the people to help them too. So I don't know, just like everything is going to the high priest, and I know that's now Jesus is our high priest. So that just kind of reminded me too, like you seem separated, but yet the next chapter 14 does show the high priest kind of meeting the leprosy halfway type of idea. So I kind of like sitting with that too. Even though it might have seemed like they were the worst ones off and out, the priest didn't stop trying to help them or whatever.
And
if I'm interpreting all that correctly.
And if you guys don't know Laura and I's story, we also came out of New Thought, New Age type practices. And this chapter spoke to some of that, not only to the pagan worships of what they were doing, like sacrificing kids and things, but even starting here, it talks about mediums and things that contacting the dead. I just know that is very somewhat popular in all different forms in this world, how that can, speak to spirits and things like that. So I bring that up, that this book does speak to that. that as believers, we are not to mess with that part of the spiritual world. It exists, it is real, the evil is there, and God is calling all of us not to partake in that. So you're a Christian, you call yourself a Christian, do not seek mediums, do not seek talking to spirits or any form of manner of that. So I just share that kind of as a warning, because I know reading this again, every time I read those verses, it does hit to me. It reminds me of my past. It reminds me of be careful of all that. I encourage all of you, if you are again falling into those practices, to repent of it, to come back to God's ways, to the Lord, to His ways. He is good.
And another thing I just noticed through Leviticus, not only is God's holiness and His ways of setting His people apart to be holy and clean and stuff, was also the mission of the priests. A lot of this was dealing with the high priest and what the priestess role was. One of their main roles was, at least I noticed from reading Leviticus here, was the mission was to bring things into cleanliness. You know, that's what Jesus' blood does for us. It makes us clean in God's presence so we can dwell with Him always, with the gift of the Holy Spirit. So it just makes me more grateful and in awe of what Jesus did.
Yep.
So yeah, that's where I sit with Leviticus.
Yeah, that's kind of where most of the stuff, there was a few mentions of fearing of the Lord there in chapter 25, something connection we noticed back starting in Exodus I saw carrying out. I also noticed there was more talk of the festivals here, which I know also very important in the Jewish world and the Jewish calendar, and how all of them point to Jesus and what He did for all of us. So I like sitting with always learning more about them. Just then how this book ends in chapter 26 and 27. They're reminded of God's like, if you follow my statutes and you observe my commands, I'm going to give you all this stuff. And He lists all.
I like the remembrance thing.
He's also, but there in verse 14 in chapter 26, if you do not obey me, this is what's going to happen. All this other stuff He's going to do. He just goes on and on of knowing that they're going to do this.
Oh, I found it. Yay. What I was talking about earlier, friends, about the not smelling the smoothing aroma, it's here in chapter 26 that Michelle's getting into here.
Welcome.
Thank you. And it's starting at verse 14, it says, but if you do not obey, so right there it's already starting with what's going to happen if you don't obey. And then there at verse 31, it ends with, I will not smell your smoothing aroma. So again, I think it's just going to, I don't know, there's probably again a lot deeper things going on there, but just seeing that it ties with that if you do not obey all the stuff that I said, I won't be smelling that smoothing aroma.
But there's always hope. God always in His judgment has His mercy. And then He has there in verse 40 of this chapter, but when
And you confess,
confess their sins, humble themselves, and come back, like He will remember. He will do this. He will. So I just like that. And
you learn more about God. He's always gracious for those who humble themselves.
In verse 44, it says, yet in spite of this, while they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, so as to destroy them and break my covenant with them, since I am the Lord your God. For their sake, I'll remember the covenant with their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am their Lord. I just love sitting with that too, that God's still always good, even though we continue to mess up. And yes, as Lloyd said earlier, it highlights more of what Jesus did for all of us and how He has made us pure, cleansed, holy before the Lord. Obviously nothing
but then
we
again,
have done.
What are we known as? We are all known as priests, right? So if this role of the priest back in Leviticus was to make everybody clean again, so I see that maybe that's still part of our mission today, is not only to spread the gospel, but is to make unclean things clean? I don't know, but...
Well, I look at that because that goes back into Matthew. Remember, he was showing it, but it's Jesus that purifies people.
So people just need Jesus.
We need to bring people, it goes back to we're part of helping people come back into community with God, reminding people of calling out their sins, having them come back to God's ways in loving, merciful ways. We need to share because we're all have sins, right? Yes. So we need to make sure we're being merciful about it, but also truthful at the same time, which it's something I struggle with and probably will always struggle with, how you approach that or how you say it or how you do it.
Yeah, I also sit with just the awe of God again. Fear and the awe of God that so many people I think lack. And so this chapter really helps me sit with that more.
I definitely think this helps you get to that perspective. I know for me growing up, I had more of God's way over there. I'm going to do my own thing. But I think we need to remember He is holy and mighty and good and gracious, and really let this book, Leviticus, help you see that more. Sisters, that is Leviticus. If you want to join along with us again, reading through the Bible for the second time, we are going to start now into, I think it's Numbers is the next one. All the details will be down below to how you can join our locals community. We would love to have you. You can join anytime. There's no rules in this. And just join along with us.
All right, see you in the next one.